I woke up that morning to the smell of toast and the soft hum of our old ceiling fan. The sunlight was pouring through the window, hitting the wooden floor in warm golden stripes, and for a moment, everything felt normal. My son, just 5 years old, was sitting on the living room rug, building what he proudly called his castle fortress out of blocks. He hummed to himself, completely absorbed, oblivious to the world outside his little kingdom. I watched him for a while, feeling that familiar swell of love, the kind that tightens your chest in a good way. I poured myself a cup of coffee and tried to savor the quiet, the way the world seemed paused just for us. There was something comforting in this routine, the way the morning unfolded in gentle predictability, the soft clink of the spoon against the mug, the distant sound of birds outside, the low murmur of the neighbors starting their day that I remembered. A morning not long ago, where he'd stumbled into my arms after a dream that had scared him. He had clutched my shirt, tiny fingers digging in, and whispered, "Mom, I don't like nightmares." I held him close, felt the warmth of his little body, and thought I could stay here forever. That memory lingered, a small bubble of happiness tucked into the back of my mind. But even as I sat there, sipping my coffee, a subtle unease was creeping in, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. My parents were visiting that weekend, and while they had always doted on him, I noticed how their attention seemed to gravitate more often toward his older cousin, their real granddaughter. It was small things at first, an extra cookie here, a longer hug there, little smiles that didn't quite reach my son. At the time, I shrugged it off, telling myself it was harmless, that love wasn't a finite thing. But today there was something in the air, a weight I couldn't shake. He looked up at me suddenly, grinning, as if sensing my thoughts. "Mom, look, I made a secret door in my castle." I smiled, crouched down to examine it, and felt the warmth return, even if just for a moment. The sound of his laughter was the only thing that mattered right then, a fragile shield against the niggling feeling at the edge of my mind. Everything seemed fine, perfectly normal even, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the tiny flicker of imbalance, the way attention was divided, the way small preferences showed themselves in the most innocuous ways. Today, I told myself, would be just another morning. But something told me this morning was going to be different. That I was still kneeling on the floor, helping him line up his blocks when my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw the message from my parents. "We're taking Lily out today. Hope he won't mind staying home for a bit." My heart sank. The words hit me before my brain fully processed them. Hope he won't mind. As if my son's feelings were just a minor detail, a checkbox in someone else's plan. I looked down at him, unaware of what was happening, his small fingers tapping the blocks, humming that innocent tune of his. I felt a tight knot form in my chest, a mix of confusion and hurt. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that the people who are supposed to love him equally, his grandparents, are openly favoring someone else? My mind raced through all the tiny signs I'd brushed off. Before, longer hugs for his cousin, more enthusiastic praise, little treats slipped into her hands while he got. Well, nothing that I remembered a Saturday a few months ago, the sun high in the sky, when they had surprised Lily with an ice cream trip. My son had looked at the window, hoping maybe we'd get to go too, and then shuffled back to his toys. When he realized he wasn't invited, I had hugged him tight, telling him it didn't matter, but I still remember the sadness in his little eyes, the way he tried to smile and hide it. That memory stung now more than ever, because I could feel history repeating itself. That I forced a smile and crouched down next to him. "Hey buddy, Grandma and Grandpa are going out with Lily today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why don't we finish your castle first?" He looked up at me, a tiny crease forming between his brows. "Why can't I go?" he asked softly, almost like he already knew the answer. I knelt there, in that quiet living room, and felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. I wanted to explain that this was unfair, that he deserved the same attention, the same little adventures, the same excitement. But how do you make a 5-year-old understand favoritism? How do you shield him from disappointment that cuts so deep, yet is so ordinary in the world of adults? So, I stayed silent, ruffling his hair and guiding him to place the last block in his fortress. I smiled, tried to act cheerful, but inside, I was simmering. The sting of exclusion wasn't just his anymore, it was mine too. I couldn't ignore it, not now. And I knew deep down, that this day, which had begun like any other, was going to mark the beginning of a test neither of us had asked for. The door clicked shut behind them, and the sudden silence hit the room like a wave. It was just the two of us now, me, trying to mask my frustration, and my little boy, left to his own devices. "Go ahead, honey," I said softly, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "Mommy has some cleaning to do. You can help with the floor if you want." I watched as he hesitated for a moment, then knelt down with a rag and bucket, his tiny hands scrubbing the tile. The sound of the wet cloth against the floor was almost deafening in the quiet house. Every swipe, every drop of water, felt like a reminder that he was being left behind, not because of anything he did, but because someone else was deemed more important, more deserving of attention that I remembered the first time I'd caught him, trying to follow Lily out the door, only to be gently but firmly held back. The look on his face then, it was a mixture of longing and confusion, a heartache too big for his little chest. Today, the same tiny heartbreak played out in slow motion before me, and I couldn't step in without breaking some unspoken rule that I busied myself with dishes nearby, my hands moving automatically while my mind raced. Why did they have to treat him this way? He's their grandson too. He's just as excited, just as deserving. I wanted to stop scrubbing, pick him up, tell him that he didn't have to be left behind, but I stayed put, feeling the weight of helplessness pressing down on me. The smell of the floor cleaner filled the room, sharp and almost bitter, mixing with the faint scent of toast that still lingered in the air. He hummed quietly as he scrubbed, not complaining, just moving in a steady rhythm as if it were some kind of penance for being less important. I felt my chest tighten at the injustice of it all. I knelt beside him, offering a half-hearted smile. "You're doing a great job, buddy," I said, though my voice cracked slightly. He looked up, eyes wide, trying to gauge if I meant it. I did, of course, but I also wished I could mean that. The world would treat him fairly for once. That he wouldn't have to scrub the floor while others got all the adventure, all the attention. That I realized then how small these moments might seem to anyone else. But to him, they were shaping a sense of self, what it meant to matter, what it meant to be loved equally. And right now, in this quiet kitchen with sunlight streaming through the window, I felt both anger and sorrow coiling inside me. He was left behind, and no amount of polishing floors would fix the truth that the people who should have seen him first hadn't. The house felt different once the front door closed. The normal morning hum, the creak of the floorboards, the distant cars outside, the faint ticking of the wall clock suddenly seemed louder, emptier, almost accusatory. I sat at the kitchen table, trying to sip my coffee, but it had gone cold. My eyes kept flicking to him, kneeling on the floor with his little rag, his small body hunched in concentration, as if the act of scrubbing could erase the absence of attention he so clearly deserved. The silence was suffocating. I could hear his small, careful movements, the soft swish of water across tile, the occasional squeak of his knees against the floor. And then I noticed it. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of abandonment, of being left behind while the world went on without you. That I remembered another morning, months ago, when he had stayed behind while Lily got a new toy she'd been begging for. He had clutched his blankie, sitting alone on the rug, staring at nothing in particular. I had tried to distract him, to make it seem like nothing was wrong. But I can still see it. The way his little shoulders slumped, the way he tried to smile, but couldn't quite reach his eyes. Today, it was happening again, and the weight of familiarity made it sting even more. That I wanted to kneel beside him, to pull him into my lap, to let him know he mattered more than anyone else's plans. But I didn't. I stayed back, my chest tight, hands gripping the edge of the table. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, watching someone you love wobble without being able to reach them in time. He looked up at me once, eyes wide, seeking reassurance. "Mom, they're gone," he whispered, a note of sadness I wasn't ready to hear. My throat tightened, and I had to swallow hard. I nodded, forcing a smile I hoped he could trust, and said, "I know, honey, but I'm right here with you." Still, the words felt small, powerless. The empty house seemed to echo with the sound of what wasn't there. Laughter, voices, footsteps of family who had chosen someone else's company over his. I could feel a simmering anger rising, tinged with sorrow. Not for me, but for him. The unfairness of it all. the subtle way he was being told, without words, that he was somehow less deserving. As he continued scrubbing, I watched him work, little beads of sweat forming at his hairline, his face set in quiet determination. It broke my heart to see him try so hard to occupy himself, to fill a space that wasn't meant for him. And in that silence, the quiet house became a mirror of the quiet ache inside me, a realization that the favoritism wasn't subtle anymore. It was painfully obvious. That I knelt down beside him, careful not to startle him, and brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, forcing a warmth into my voice that I didn't entirely feel. "You're doing amazing." His little hands paused for a moment, and I saw that flicker of hope in his eyes, the tiny, fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, he was enough. That I wanted to wrap him in my arms and tell him it was all unfair, that it wasn't his fault, that he mattered more than anyone could ever make him feel. But life doesn't always give you that luxury, not in front of a 5-year-old who is trying so hard to appear brave. Instead, I tried to let my presence speak louder than words. I hovered nearby, leaning against the counter, letting him know I was there, that I wasn't going anywhere. He looked up at me again and whispered, "Mom." They went out with Lily. His voice was small, hesitant, almost as if saying it aloud made it too real. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah, they did. But that doesn't change how special you are. You're my little hero, and we're going to finish this castle together, okay?" I remembered a different morning, not long ago, when he had tripped on the sidewalk and skinned his knee. I had scooped him up, tears mingling with laughter as I cleaned the scrape. I had told him, "You're stronger than you think." That memory hit me now because, even though the wounds today weren't physical, the lesson was the same. He needed reassurance, love, and validation, even when the world seemed to overlook him. I watched him return to scrubbing, slower now, more mindful of my gaze than the task at hand. I offered him a small toy, a little figurine I had found under the couch, and said, "Here, maybe your castle needs a knight." He smiled faintly, placing it carefully on the floor near the blocks. That tiny smile, fleeting though it was, gave me a fragile sense of relief. But as I lingered there, I couldn't ignore the knot in my chest, the simmering frustration, the sadness, the helplessness that came with watching someone you love navigate a world that seems to favor others. I thought about how unfair it all was, how quickly favoritism can wound without a single cruel word. And yet, I stayed there, quiet, letting him feel seen, letting him feel loved. Even if it was just by me. I realized then that this small attempt at reassurance was more than just a comfort for him. It was a lifeline for me, too. Watching him carry on, trying to be brave while being left behind, reminded me that even in the face of exclusion, our bond could be stronger than the world's blind favoritism. I wouldn't let this moment define him, or us. Not if I could help it. The sound of the front door opening made my stomach tighten. Laughter spilled into the house, light, cheerful, oblivious. Lily's voice, high and giggling, echoed through the hallway, followed by my parents, chatting and smiling, completely unaware of the quiet tension left behind. My son froze for a moment, his little hands gripping the rag like it could anchor him against the wave of exclusion washing over him. They plopped down on the couch, stories spilling out about the ice cream, the park, the little adventures that had unfolded without him. I forced a smile as I listened, nodding along, but inside, it felt like a punch to the gut. Every detail they recounted, every laugh that didn't include him, was a reminder of the favoritism I'd been sensing all along. And now, there was no escaping it. I remembered another day, months ago, when the same pattern played out. A trip to the zoo, a surprise gift, and the same look on my son's face. The combination of longing and confusion. Back then, I told myself it was harmless, just a small oversight. But now, seeing it again, with such clarity and repetition, it wasn't harmless anymore. It was intentional, or at least it felt like it, and it cut deeper than I expected. I watched my son's eyes dart between me and the returning party, searching for some acknowledgement, some validation that he mattered too. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sounds like you had fun," I said, glancing at Lily, who was practically vibrating with excitement. He nodded quietly, and I saw that tiny crease of hurt between his brows. My chest ached. I wanted to scoop him up, shield him from the unfairness. But I knew this moment couldn't be erased. The house smelled faintly of melted ice cream and sunscreen, starkly contrasting with the cleaner scent lingering from the floor he had scrubbed. That smell, sweet, summery, exclusive, was now a reminder of what he had been left out of, a sensory detail that would stick with him and me far longer than the day itself. That I clenched my fists briefly at my sides, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that love can sometimes be conditional, that attention can be uneven, and that people you trust can make him feel small without even realizing it? I wanted to shout, to demand fairness, to assert that he deserved just as much joy, just as much acknowledgement. But I stayed silent, letting my emotions simmer. It was then that the realization hit me fully. This wasn't a one-time oversight. This was a pattern, and it was shaping my son's understanding of his place in the world. Watching him sit there, trying to participate quietly while the others celebrated, I felt both protective fury and profound sadness. Today, the sting of reality wasn't just for him. It was mine too. And I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. After they had left the living room to put Lily's backpack away and chatter about their little outing, I sank into the kitchen chair, my hands wrapped around my coffee cup, trying to steady the storm. Inside me, the warmth of the mug did nothing to calm the tight knot in my chest. I watched my son quietly stacking his blocks again, his small movements deliberate, almost as if he were trying to make sense of a world that repeatedly left him behind. I couldn't stop replaying the morning in my head. Every detail felt sharper now. The laughter in the hall, the smell of ice cream still lingering faintly, the bright excitement in Lily's voice. And there he was, silent, alone, scrubbing a floor that no one had asked him to clean, filling the space with effort instead of love. My mind churned with frustration, guilt, and a quiet, simmering anger. Why did they always favor her? Why did my son, the one who deserves love equally, always come second? I thought about all the subtle hints I had ignored in the past, convincing myself they were innocent, fleeting. But the truth was staring me in the face now. This wasn't small. This was a pattern. And it was hurting him more than I had fully realized until today. I remembered myself as a child, moments when I felt invisible in my own family, when attention was handed out unevenly, and you learned to shrink a little inside so no one would notice you weren't chosen. I could feel a pang of recognition, a knot of anger and sorrow that this wasn't just happening to him. It was a cycle that repeated across generations. I leaned back, staring out the window at the sun-drenched street, letting my mind wander through possibilities. Could I confront them directly, tell them how unfair this felt? Would that make things worse? Or should I try to protect my son quietly, shielding him as best I could, even if it meant swallowing my own frustration? I glanced over at him again, his small face intent, determined, trying to carry on despite the imbalance around him. My heart ached and swelled at the same time. I realized that my reflection wasn't just about their favoritism. It was about my role in teaching him his worth. Was I giving him the tools to understand he's deserving, even when others overlooked him? Was I showing him he could be strong without resentment consuming him? A tear slipped down my cheek before I could catch it. I quickly wiped it away, taking a deep breath. I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear: I couldn't let this pattern define him. I needed to find a way, my way, to make sure he knew he mattered, no matter how loud the other voices in the room were, no matter how often he was left behind. And in that quiet moment, with the sunlight painting stripes on the floor and my son humming softly as he worked, I made a promise to myself. I would fight for him. I would protect his sense of self-worth. I would be his voice, his shield, and his safe space. Because if I didn't, who would? By the time dinner rolled around, the house felt heavier than usual. The chatter was louder, the laughter brighter, and every smile directed at Lily felt like a quiet jab, a reminder that my son had been left behind all day. I forced myself to breathe, to sip my drink slowly, but inside, my thoughts were spinning. Do I say something? Do I stay quiet? I stared at the table, watching the way their attention kept drifting toward Lily. I could feel my knuckles tightening on my fork. Every instinct in me screamed to confront them, to make them see what they were doing, not just for me, but for my son. But a part of me hesitated. I remembered past confrontations, where speaking up had only led to awkward tension or worse, being dismissed. I didn't want to ruin the evening, didn't want to make my little boy feel like he'd caused conflict. Just by existing, my eyes kept finding him, his small frame hunched slightly over his plate, trying to eat quietly, trying not to feel the sting of exclusion. That sight ignited something in me, a mixture of fury and protectiveness so strong. I could feel it in my chest. I wanted to tell them how wrong it was, how unfair, how it made him feel invisible. And yet, I also needed to be strategic. I needed my voice to matter without letting anger rule it. That I took a deep breath, imagining the words I would say. He's here too, and he deserves the same attention you give her. You can't keep overlooking him. Saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. My heart raced. My throat tightened. But I knew I had to try. Because if I didn't, the quiet pain he was feeling would be normalized in his world, and I couldn't let that happen. As the conversation around me continued, I felt my resolve solidifying. I would speak calmly, but firmly. I would make them see, not through anger, but through clarity. I wanted them to understand that favoritism wasn't harmless, that leaving him behind created invisible wounds. I didn't want to shame them. I wanted them to recognize the impact of their actions. I glanced at my son again. He was watching me, eyes flicking nervously between me and the others. I offered him a small, reassuring smile. "I've got you," my look said. And in that moment, I realized the confrontation wasn't just with them. It was also with myself. I had to find courage I didn't know I had. I had to stand up for him, even if it meant swallowing fear, even if it meant risking discomfort or pushback. Dinner went on, voices filling the room, but I felt a quiet fire igniting inside me. I was ready. I would speak, not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of love, because he deserved it, because he deserved to be seen. And finally, I understood that protecting him sometimes meant risking my own comfort. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The room was alive with chatter, but my focus was only on him, my little boy, sitting quietly, eyes wide, waiting, hoping I'd notice. I couldn't let this moment slip by. Not today, not ever again. "Can I say something?" I finally spoke, my voice calm but carrying a firmness that made the room pause. Heads turned, a flicker of surprise on my parents' faces. I held my son's gaze for a moment, and I could see the hope rising there, fragile but real. That was enough to steady my nerves. "I know you all love Lily, and that's wonderful," I began, choosing my words carefully. "But my son is here too. He deserves the same attention, the same excitement, the same love." I kept my tone measured, but I didn't soften the message. I wanted them to see it, not just hear it. I remembered every little moment he had been left behind, every quiet disappointment he had swallowed. I thought about the mornings he had tried to follow them, the afternoons he had spent quietly scrubbing the floor, the little beads of effort he had poured into filling spaces that weren't meant for him. And now, I was standing up for him, speaking for all the moments he couldn't. There was a pause, a subtle shift in the room. I felt tension rise, but I didn't let it shake me. I continued, "I'm asking you to see him, really see him. He's just as special, just as deserving, and it's not okay for him to be left behind while the other gets all the attention." I glanced at my son again. His lips were slightly parted, eyes shining, almost as if he couldn't believe this was happening. I reached over and took his hand gently, giving it a reassuring squeeze. He was mine, and he needed to know that I would always be his advocate, his protector. Slowly, the energy in the room began to shift. My parents exchanged glances, perhaps realizing for the first time the weight of their actions, the way favoritism had silently but consistently chipped at his self-worth. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no tears falling from me or them. But it was clear that a line had been drawn, a recognition had been made. In that moment, I felt a mixture of relief and empowerment. I had spoken up, not out of anger, not to punish, but to stand firmly for my son. And for the first time that day, I could see a spark of pride in his eyes. He was visible. He was valued. And the unfairness, the imbalance, the sting of exclusion, while it hadn't vanished entirely, was being acknowledged. I knew this was just the beginning, that patterns take time to change. But right now, I had taken action. I had stood for him, and that made all the difference. For once, he wasn't alone. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window in the same warm, golden stripes as before, but the house felt lighter somehow. The tension of yesterday had shifted, replaced with a fragile, quiet hope. My son was sitting at the table, carefully lining up his blocks again. But this time he looked up at me with a small, confident smile that I poured him a glass of juice and sat across from him. Noticing the way he relaxed a little, the way his shoulders weren't so hunched. He was still small, still 5, but something had changed. He knew, finally, that he mattered, not just to me, but that his existence deserved recognition. And even more than that, I felt the beginnings of a change in the family dynamic, subtle but real, like the first stirrings of spring after a long winter. I remembered the days before, mornings filled with quiet exclusion, evenings spent watching him quietly try to fill spaces that weren't meant for him. And now, those memories didn't sting as sharply. They were reminders of why I had to speak up, why I had to stand firm, why I had to fight for him when no one else would. That we spent the morning together, building his castle fortress larger than ever before. He hummed, laughed, and occasionally looked up at me, eyes bright, as if checking to see if I was proud. I nodded every time, because I was, immensely. And in that moment, I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming the present and choosing to move forward. Together that I watched him play, noticing small changes. He volunteered ideas, added little details, and seemed more confident in his creations. I felt a quiet swell of pride and relief. He was learning resilience, learning that even when the world overlooked him, he was enough. And I was learning too, that advocating for him, speaking out, and protecting his sense of self-worth didn't make me confrontational. It made me a guardian, a witness to his life, and the bridge between his hurt and his hope. By the time the afternoon sun filtered through the window, bathing the room in soft light, I felt an unexpected calm. We had navigated the sting, the exclusion, and the imbalance. And while the world might still be imperfect, we had found our footing. My son wasn't just surviving. He was thriving, slowly but surely, and I would be there for every small victory, every laugh, every block placed in his fortress. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. I could let go of some of the tension that had wrapped around my chest, knowing that even if favoritism or exclusion returned, my son would always have someone in his corner, me. And for him, that made all the difference.